In the late 9th century, England stood on the edge of collapse. A storm had come from the north, swift, brutal, and relentless. They came in longships cutting through cold seas like blades through flesh. They were the Vikings. And they were not just raiders anymore. They were conquerors. Kingdom after kingdom had fallen before them. Northumbria was shattered. East Anglia was crushed. Mercia, once powerful, had been broken and divided. What remained was fragile, fractured, and afraid. Only one kingdom still stood unconquered, Wessex. And at its head stood a king who would one day be remembered as Alfred the Great. But in the year 878, even he would face his darkest hour. For years, the Great Heathen Army had carved its way across England, led by hardened warlords, men who knew no fear and showed no mercy. Among them was a leader named Guthrum. He was not just a raider, he was a strategist, patient, calculating, and determined to finish what the Vikings had started. Wessex was the final prize. Alfred had fought them before. He had resisted, negotiated, even paid for peace when he had no other choice. But peace with the Vikings was never truly peace. It was only a pause, and in the winter of 878, that pause came to an end, during the sacred festival of Twelfth Night, when feasting replaced vigilance and celebration softened defenses. Guthrum made his move. Under the cover of winter darkness, Viking forces descended upon the royal stronghold of Chippenham. There was no warning, no time to prepare, only chaos. The attack was swift and devastating. Caught completely off guard, Alfred's forces collapsed under the assault. The kingdom that had resisted for so long was suddenly on the brink of destruction, and its king was forced to flee. Alfred escaped with only a handful of loyal followers, vanishing into the cold wilderness of Somerset. Behind him, Wessex burned. It was more than a defeat. It was near annihilation. The last independent Anglo-Saxon kingdom had fallen into Viking hands, and its king was now a fugitive, deep within the marshlands of Somerset, surrounded by water, reeds, and silence. Alfred found refuge. Here, in the remote stronghold of Athelney, he disappeared from the world. A king without a throne, a ruler without a kingdom. Later legends would tell simple stories of this time, of a humbled king burning cakes in a peasant's home. But the reality was far more grim. This was not a tale of humility. It was a fight for survival. Cut off from his people, hunted by his enemies, Alfred endured the harsh conditions of the marshes. Cold, isolation, uncertainty. But he did not surrender, because even in exile, Alfred was still king. And from the shadows he began to rebuild. Word spread quietly across the land. The king still lived. In secret, loyal men began to gather. Messengers moved carefully through forests and villages, avoiding Viking patrols. Hope, once thought lost, began to stir again. Then came an opportunity. A Viking force moved along the Devon coast, seeking to tighten their grip on the region. But Alfred's loyal commanders were ready. At Canterbury they struck. The attack was swift and decisive. The Viking force was driven back, defeated. It was a small victory, but it carried a powerful message. Wessex was not finished. Encouraged by this success, Alfred changed his approach. He could not face the Viking army head-on, not yet. So he adapted, using the terrain to his advantage. He launched a campaign of guerrilla warfare. Small groups of fighters struck quickly, then disappeared into forests and marshes before the enemy could respond. Supply lines were disrupted. Patrols were ambushed. The Vikings, so used to overwhelming their enemies with force, now found themselves harassed, weakened, and uncertain. For the first time, the invaders began to feel pressure. Months passed, and slowly, steadily, Alfred rebuilt his strength. Then in the spring of 878, the moment came. From across Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire, men began to gather. Farmers, fighters, survivors. They answered the king's call. At a place known as Egbert's Stone, Alfred emerged from hiding. For the first time since his defeat, he stood before his people once more. And they did not see a broken man. They saw a leader, a king who had endured, who had survived, and who was ready to fight. The army of Wessex was reborn, and now there would be no more retreat. In May of 878, the two forces met near Edington. Battle of Edington. On one side stood the Viking army, battle-hardened, confident, undefeated for years. On the other stood Alfred's force, smaller but united, driven by something far stronger than conquest: survival. The battle began with the clash of shield walls. Wood and iron collided with a deafening force. Spears thrust forward. Swords rose and fell. It was brutal, relentless. Vikings pressed hard as they always had. But this time, something was different. The Saxons held their ground. They did not break. Step by step, Alfred's army pushed forward. Their shield wall held firm, their resolve unshaken. What followed was not just a battle, but a turning point. The Viking advance slowed, then faltered, and then it broke. For the first time in years, the Great Heathen Army was forced into retreat. Guthrum's forces fled the battlefield, retreating back to Chippenham. But Alfred did not let them escape. He pursued them and laid siege to the stronghold. Trapped inside, cut off from supplies, the Viking army began to weaken. Days turned into weeks. Hunger set in. Morale collapsed. The once unstoppable force was now desperate. And Guthrum, the warlord who had nearly destroyed Wessex, faced a choice: fight and die, or surrender. In the end, he chose to surrender. But Alfred's victory would not be defined by destruction. It would be defined by transformation. At the settlement that followed, known as the Treaty of Wedmore, the terms were set. And from that survival, something greater would grow. Alfred's victory did not end the Viking presence in England, but it ensured that the Anglo-Saxon identity would not be erased. It gave England a future, from exile in the marshes to triumph on the battlefield. Alfred the Great had achieved what few thought possible. He had saved his kingdom, and in doing so, he had changed the course of history. Because sometimes, the fate of a nation does not rest on power or numbers, but on the will of one man who refuses to surrender.